So, Shelly Spiegel Coleman, and I'm currently the strategic advisor for Californians Together. Prior to that, I was the executive director for Californians Together. And then prior to that, I worked for 27 years at the LA County Office of Education as the consultant in charge of the Multilingual Academic Support Unit. And prior to that, I was a teacher and a principal and a district specialist. But through my years, at let's see, through my years, yes, as I was a district specialist is when it started. I became involved with Cabe. So it's over 50 years ago, I think. So I was on the board as the regional rep, and then I believe I was the vice president, and then I was president. So I served on the board for quite a few years, and then as past president too. And they were, it's really where I really grew up. I grew up being on the CABE board and being involved with CABE was a very important part of my life. Um, it really, um, it really helped me understand how we create policy. It helped me understand the power of CABE and our members and what we were able to do for our families and our children. When I worked at Alhambra City Schools as a district specialist, Belia Cruz was my supervisor, and she was the district director for English learners. And Belia was on the board of CABE. She was a board member of CABE, and so she took me to board meetings. She would take me to board meetings, and she wanted me to know about it and how it worked. And Chuck Acosta was president at the time. And so I met Chuck Acosta, and Chuck Acosta liked the way I engaged with the people on the board and the work that I did back in the district. I remember doing a lot of letter writing campaigns that Cave wanted. I remember collecting hundreds of letters. And then Chuck decided that he wanted me on the board, right? And that I should run for the board. And then also he wanted to hire me. So he hired me at the LA County Office of Education. So it really was Belia Cruz who brought me to CABE board meetings and introduced me to the work of CABE. I think I have a different memory than other people have, but when there was the first year of Title VII funding, the first year, which is now Title III, but it was initially called Title VII. It was federal English learner money. And the very first bilingual programs that it funded, one was in El Rancho School District. That's where I taught. One was in Montebello School District. And there was a third one that was up north. I can't remember. I think it was San Francisco Unified. I believe so. And so we had a technical assistance center at Whittier Union College that helped all of us figure out what we were doing because none of us knew what bilingual education was at the time. There were programs, there were no materials, no books or anything. And so what I remember is that there was a bilingual conference at Whittier College. And I don't know if it was an official CABE conference or not, but there was a conference there. And then I remember a conference, I guess it was the Riverside one, but I'm not sure, Jan. And I do remember one in Anaheim. Those were the early conferences that I remember. But the very first one was at Whittier College for me. But it may have been just a Title VII conference. It was the place to be. If you were going to do bilingual education, there was no other place, right? Um, uh, you had to be a part of CABE. That was where people who were doing research in those early years were there. People who were trying to make sense of what it means to be in a bilingual classroom. People who were developing their own materials. I mean, in those early years, there were no materials, so we were all developing our own materials. So people would bring those there and show them in a workshop, and then you go, "Oh my God, can I use that? I mean, here's a new set of materials," so on and so forth. So yes, it was the place that you had to be if you were in a bilingual program. And the bilingual program that I was in that was funded, one of the first three federally funded programs, had this design that there were 2 full-time teachers in a classroom and a full-time aide. The premise was that one of us would be out of the classroom all the time developing materials and curriculum because nothing existed. But we were all young, none of us were married, none of us had kids. Well, that's a stupid idea. We'll all be in the classroom the whole day and then we'll work afterwards to design the curriculum and the materials, right? So we had 3 full-time people in the classroom in this first few years, but honestly, we had nothing. I remember we flew down we drove people drove down to Tijuana and brought up books. It was called Dan y Elena. It was Dick and Jane in Spanish. It was a dog, run, run, corre, corre, corre. It was the same thing. I mean, that was it. There was literally nothing. So we really were developing things from scratch to use with our students, right? So those are those very early years of Title VII funding, right? Over the years, for sure, over the years, we developed different models. I think I think by and large, most of us had kind of a 90-10 model. I believe it was kind of like that initially. Um, Although we had English only students in our classrooms, for sure. In our classrooms, we had English only students. Um, I remember the whole thing on how to teach English as a second language was really a big deal. It still is. Nobody really is very good at it. We're still talking about we need more professional development on ELD. But those early years, there was a lot in terms of what does teaching English look like in a bilingual program. And then we were very, very fortunate when the Title VII Technical Assistance Centers, or comprehensive centers, I think they were called, came about. And Alberto Ochoa was the director of the one that serviced Southern California. And he had a tremendous staff. One of the members, Margarita Calderon, who did develop this multi district teacher training institute model. And at the time, I was at LA County Office of Education when that started. So that was after my stint in teaching with the Title VII program, after my time with Delia Cruz and Anaheim and Alhambra City Schools. But when I came to the county office, my very first year at the county office is when the MTTI got started. And thank God, because I didn't know what I was supposed to do at the county office. And so I became very engaged with Alberto and the staff at the Title VII Comprehensive Center and did many, many years multi district teacher training institute professional development, many years. There was different content. The concept was multiple days of training, not sequential, a day to train, a day you go back to work in your district, you come back, go back. And that the people who came were really trainers themselves. So they would go back and train teachers, come back and tell us, so on and so forth. So initially, it really was on the research and the program design for bilingual programs. And then we branched out. Then we did one on cooperative learning because that became a piece that was important. So we did, these trainings were 7, 8, 10, 12 days of trainers coming out over the year working with us and going back. And then they would come for another year, do the same thing with cooperative learning, and then another year we did literacy. So there was different content, but the model was really um, training trainers. And then we always had a coaching piece. So there was always training and coaching so that they could go back and train and they could go back and coach. And we really built a very strong cadre of leaders in the school districts and professional development people in districts that had a deep understanding of research and practice. And that was all uplifted and created by the Title VII Center in San Diego with Alberto as the director. Well, initially it was all transitional. It was all transitional. The whole idea of late exit came much later. Initially, all the programs were transitional, um, and that we were trying to get kids to be proficient in. We were teaching them literacy in their home language, but we really were trying to get them to be literate in English, right? So I think about at our titles we had the program through 5th grade at our school with that first Title VII, but there was a lot less primary language than there would be now in a maintenance program. There was a lot less. There was yeah, there was a lot less. So, I think this whole issue of transitional versus a comprehensive program, came later, did come later, when people were trying to decide what would be best for kids, right? I think it just came from all of us that were, creating the program. And then, people started writing about it. Carlos Cortez wrote about it, Margarita. I mean, people started writing about it, right? Um, uh, the English model students in the bilingual classrooms, they weren't learning to read and write in Spanish. It was not a dual immersion program. They were learning to read in English, right? The Spanish speakers in our classrooms were learning to read in their primary language, but you can imagine hearing a lot of English, right? And so the whole issue of dual immersion wasn't around for a long time. So although there were some English speakers in our classrooms, uh, it wasn't to have a dual immersion. It wasn't that everybody was becoming bilingual and bilingual. It really was for students to become proficient in English, right? What happened, the Title VII Center was important, but then what happened was the State Department got Title VII money, right? And so there was a whole group of people at the State Department under the leadership of Dr. Guillermo Lopez, right? And so what they did is they created a theoretical framework that really was supposed to be the underpinnings of what was to be uh, uh, the research base and the practice base for English learners. And so that theoretical framework became part of the multi district teacher training institute. And so what we in terms of models, that was the time that those came about. And so the department produced those publications and we did trainings around them. And then they did a case studies. They did a case studies of what it would be to implement the theoretical framework. And that's where we had the Eastman model. That's where the conversation about a comprehensive program extending beyond 3rd grade came about, with the different models for the implementation of the theoretical framework. And so that's where we started, and that's where we had, Jim Cummins, and that's where we had Steve Krashen and Eleanor Thonis and Tracy Terrell. That's where the real conversation about English language development became a lot clearer. We had Tracy, and then we had all kinds of people we were all being trained on the natural approach to English language development. So it was during that period of time, it really was, as Alberta said, it was kind of the golden era because we had research, we had practice, we had the State Department, we had the Title VII comprehensive centers. So there was a lot that was going on, and people were amazed at the at the quality of leadership in school districts that they knew so much. They knew a lot about research. They knew a lot about program models, and it was because of it coming from the State Department as well as becoming from the federal government. And then, of course, um, with just shocking. I mean, then of course we did have 187 that that passed. Then the problem is we from that period, that very good period, became um, uh, the anti-immigrant period when our economy was not doing well and we needed people to blame. And so we blamed immigrants, and there was a very, very, very intense anti-immigrant sentiment, and that gave birth to Proposition 227. It became the perfect storm, right, for Proposition 227. And what better name than English for the children? Who could not be for that? Right. So that was a very, very difficult period. We had no idea that um, the petitions were being signed to qualify for the ballot until the very, very end. We didn't even know it was happening. And then all of a sudden it qualified, right? And we were just We were taken by surprise. We did not know it was happening. I don't know how it was under the radar. I don't know how he collected all that signatures with nobody reporting on it, nobody saying this was happening. And boom, it was going to be on the ballot. Um, so that was, to say the least, that was not what we were expecting, right? To say the least. Although we had already had Proposition 65 on the ballot, which was an English only proposition. So we knew the atmosphere was not good, but we did not know that this is what was coming. We did not know. The person who led all the work around the legislation for bilingual education was Peter Schiller, who worked for the Western Center for Law and Poverty. And his focus area, or his charge, was really education. And so he he worked with Assemblymember Peter Chacon, who was a teacher in his own right and saw what was happening to children and what was not happening for Latino children, Hispanic children. And he gave up being a teacher and mortgaged his house and got elected to the assembly. And his really passion and his desire was to improve the education for Hispanic Latino children. And so Peter Schiller, I don't know how the two of them hooked up, but I know they hooked up. And Chacon became the author of our initial bills, right? And so for the very first bill, I was not involved with that. I think it was 2218. But then Peter, in all his wisdom, formed what he called the Bilingual Community Coalition. And Cabe sent myself and Elizabeth Jimenez, and I forget the young man, well, we were all young, our friend's name, a man. We would go up and meet with Peter. Peter had representatives there the from the a from the Asian language community. I forgot the name of the organization, but so there was representative there. We had from Luso Americans, which was the Portuguese American organization. We had a member from Luso Americans that would meet with us. We had a rural representative from Hollister that would meet with us, and Vicky Chang, Vicky. Anyway, Vicky would come also from the Chinese American community, and so Peter had a broad coalition. We would all fly up, and then we'd talk about what we needed, and Peter would take us to all of the legislative offices. He would take us to hearings to testify. It was when I learned that if they voted not in favor, you left that room and then you were still friendly with these people. I did not understand that concept. I asked her, "How are you still talking to them? They voted." She goes, "Because next time maybe they'll vote for us." I go, "Oh, okay." So Peter really taught us. He taught us a lot. None of us knew any. I mean, what did we know about walking the halls and talking to people? So in those early years, Peter was definitely the person that organized us. And I remember that we used to always have to kind of beg Bob to fly us up. It was a round trip ticket of $50, I remember, on PSA to go to Sacramento. So for three of us, it was $150, right? But we were very lucky that we had that experience and that we learned about it. Peter at one point, Peter from the Western Center was pulled off of education and he went to health. That was the area they wanted him to deal with. And so they had somebody else, Benjamin Lopez, who became the Peter for us. And Benjamin continued pulling us together as a community. And at that time, when Benjamin took over, I was the president of CABE at that time. And that's when the reauthorization of the Bilingual Education Act was coming up because it had sunsetted. Um, and again, another kind of anti immigrant period of time. It was after the English only initiative passed in California, and then we were up for reauthorization, and it was very difficult. And we didn't get it. I was the first Anglo president of CABE who did not get reauthorization for the Bilingual Education Act. That was not very good. It was a bad time. CABE had an office in Sacramento at 926 J Street because at that time, if we wanted to get a letter out to all the legislators or we wanted to try and set up a meeting, you had to be there in person. There were no faxes. There were no fax machines or anything like that, so it all had to be delivered in person. So we opened up an office, as I said, at 926 J Street, which is now the Citizen Hotel, and, we had, at one point, just one person, Maria Morales, I remember her name, who was our executive secretary. She was there by herself, and then she got an assistant at one point. So at one point, we had 2 people in that office, but they were running to the Capitol all the time to try and talk to people, to deliver our letters, to make copies and then get them. I mean, I think we had a copy machine, I'm assuming, and then we she would have to hand them out. Yes, we had a very good office. And in that building, there was a conference room that we would use when many of us came up. We got access to a conference room. So we were very active. We were at the Capitol a lot. And um, Maria was really an excellent voice for us. She was very good. She was very, very good. That building was full of nonprofits. It was really a building of nonprofits. The lobby is exactly the same. They have not changed the lobby. That is the lobby the way it was. The elevators and everything and that stairway, the Citizen Hotel did not change that. That is what it looked like when you walked in to go to the copy office. So it is weird for me to walk into the hotel. If it wasn't for Cave, there would be no programs and services for English learners in the state of California. Um, I can't even imagine what it would be like if there hadn't been a Cave. I mean, who would speak for the parents? Who would speak for the kids? I mean, we were the only voice at that time. That and CRLA, and Western Center at War and Poverty. But I mean, absent Cave's absent Cave, the legislation, Chacon would not have had the backing that he needed to get his bills passed. Absent Cave and the Cave Conference, people would not have formed any kind of community to build upon each other's knowledge and strengths and to move the movement forward. Absent Cave, people learned how to become leaders in Cave, you know? Cave is a place where people grow up. As I told you, I feel like I grew up in Cave. People grow up there. They learn how to become a leader. They learn how to advocate. They learn what policy is. They learn the power, the potential power that we have. And absent Cave, where would we be? People would be still sitting individually in their classrooms or in their school district trying to make sense of it all by themselves. um, the movement would not be where we are today if Cave had not formed and had not taken the leadership role that they took. You know, very positive, um, and one that was extremely well respected. I can remember being in a meeting with Peter with Peter Chacon, and we were talking about creating, I think, the credential for English language development for teachers for English language development. I think that was the bill. Don't not for sure. But I remember sitting at the table and we're talking and talking, and Peter looked at me and goes, "Okay, Shelley, so what do you think?" You know, because I was talking for Cave. So what do you think? Should we do it? I mean, I mean, absent the voice at that table, right? Who would he have asked? So uh it I mean, I do believe we are where we are because of Cave being um having 50 years of this work, having 50 years of this work. And over the years, you could see the organization grow. You could see the attendance at the conference grow. All of that gave us strength. We drew strength from that. All of that gave us strength and gave us a sense of purpose and also one of persistence. You know, we persisted because of Cave. We persisted. You know, we thought we were doing really good. Thought we were doing really good. And then, you know, 227 came about. And as I said, it took us by surprise. Um, Cave took the leadership role. Jan, you were at the Cave organization during that period of time, during 227. Um, we, you know, we fought really hard. Part of it was a weakness of our programs, in all honesty, um, because the initial design of our programs did not require having a bilingual teacher in the classroom. And so some of our programs had English speaking teachers with a bilingual aid. And, you know, we just did not have we understood the research and so on and so forth, but the implementation was not clean across the state, and in some places, not very good. And so um, we didn't have the research. We didn't have the research to uphold what we knew was right for kids, what we knew was right for students. And it was a very difficult campaign. I remember the last day, the day we were trying to get out the vote. I remember making, phone calls the morning of that last day, and I called and I said, hello, yada yada yada, blah 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 blah. And no one goes, is this that ballot that keeps kids in Spanish all day long? And I go, thank you very much. And I turned around and I said, that's the last phone call I made. That's the last phone call I made. I said, because it was hard, right? So when the vote came in and we lost, uh, the very next day, I remember the very next day, um, Maldiv was holding a press conference, um, and we went. Those of us from the No on 227 committee, we went, and they said they were going to file a lawsuit, right? That they were going to file a lawsuit on 227, and I remember. Um, Antonia Hernandez called us up to her office. I remember we were all crying. We were all crying. And she goes, let's stop crying, she said, because we have a lot of work to do. We got a lot of families out there. We got a lot of kids out there. And so we have a lot of work to do, right? And so what we had to do as a community, what we did, we were very fortunate. There was an organization called California Tomorrow that was led by Dr. Lori Olson. They had some funds and they sponsored many of us to go in to go to a resort, actually a conference center in Lake Tahoe for 2.5 days for us to decide what do we do now? What can we do now? And a few things came out of it. One came out of it that we absolutely um, had to make sure that quality English language development programs existed, that it was just not going to be sink or swim, but there was going to be quality English language development programs. And then the other thing was is we needed to form an advocacy organization. And that's where the idea of Californians Together was birthed at that retreat, that we needed to form an advocacy organization that was made up of other organizations because we had about 6 organizations that were the No on 227 committee, and we didn't want to lose that coalition, and so we formalized. We were not a membership organization. That was CABE. We were going to be a coalition of advocates, right? And so in there were like 2 different tracks. We were doing Californians Together, but then um, uh, the county offices across the state really focused on English language development. We did a lot of work. We got legislation that required the development of English language development standards. And then the county offices took a lead in creating those standards. San Diego County Office of Education got the state funds to develop them. So 2 things were happening at the same time. We were trying to make sure that the kids are going to get something that was intentional and that was sensitive to their second language needs. And we were also trying to be a force to be reckoned with to see what we could do to blunt the harm that we knew was going to come from Prop 2. The wisdom of Cave was that they knew we needed to have again presence in Sacramento, that we needed somebody who was going to really be a lobbyist for us and be someone who was there day to day. And so Cave hired Martha Zaragoza Diaz. And Martha Zaragoza Diaz really took over where Peter maybe left off. And Martha became an official lobbyist for the bilingual movement, right? And kindly allowed Martha to represent Californians Together as well as Coptic. And so we did have some very good. Well, the seal of biliteracy, the state seal of biliteracy, was a really intentional piece, because what we were doing after 227, we had lots of conversations as to how do we change the hearts and minds of people? Because people were looking at our students who were taking money away from their kids. They weren't learning English or this and there was a real disdain for our children, for the students that we were teaching. And so the question was, how do we change the hearts and minds of people about the students that are in the classrooms? And how do we change people's hearts and minds about being bilingual? That bilingual should not be a death threat. It should be an honor. Or it should be a celebration. How do we change it? And so this whole idea of a state seal of biliteracy came about and because Glendale School District initiated that concept. Um, and Cabe and Californians together, we worked with Martha tirelessly, and we got the bill passed 2 times, 2 different times through the legislature for Governor Schwarzenegger to veto it both times. He vetoed it both times with stupid reasons each time, but it turned out that he just didn't believe in it at all, right? And so that, of course, was very difficult because we were hoping that would be but what happened, when that happened is that we went about, working with individual school districts. We were not daunted by his vetoes. We said, "Well, to heck with the state. We'll just work across the state and get people to create their own seal of biliteracy." And we got 55 school districts that created their own district seal of biliteracy. And then, thank goodness, Governor Jerry Brown got elected, and we all decided we'll try it one more time. Cave and Californians together said, let's try one more time with Jerry Brown. And, you know, Martha Zaragoza Diaz worked so hard, so hard. We were very fortunate that third time around that we had the chair of Senate Ed, who was a good friend of ours, and that he got it through the Senate Education Committee. And the third time we did get it to the governor, and with Martha and our tireless work, I don't know how many letters and phone calls we made this third time around, and the governor signed it. So that was a big win for us. And definitely to the credit of Cave Californians together, but really Martha shepherding it and telling us what to do. No, now we have to do this. No, now we have to, okay, we'll do it, whatever we have to do, right? And so we tried one more time, and we did. So really having a full time lobbyist is really what made the big difference for us for the later years. That made a big difference for us. And Pete and Martha, the person who Cave hired, had such a reputation. Her reputation in the halls of the Capitol. I mean, if you just walked with her one day, you couldn't walk 10 feet so somebody wouldn't stop her and hug her and how are you doing? And you would walk into a legislator's office, they all knew her, they all welcomed her. So we were a strong force, but she was our face and she was so well respected and so knowledgeable that we were able to do a lot of good things. For Prop 58, I think I had a really good partner to work with, and that was John Custovsic Correa, who was who was at that time the executive director of CABE. And Prop 58, we were very scared. We were not sure that we were going to get that passed. And if we didn't get it passed, we were not going to get another chance because you had to undo Prop 227 by another proposition. So if the electorate said no again, that was going to be it. So it was a lot rising on that Prop 58, and man, the chapters and the leaders across the state just mobilized. We had more bake sales and more fundraisers and more taco dinners and more. I mean, than could be imagined. And but during I remember all of the people mobilizing, knowing that this was a critical moment for us, and we had no idea whether we were going to win or lose. We had no idea, but there was so much investment. By then, we had a very large community all up and down the state. There was a lot of investment, and the night that that passed was, not to be believed. Right there, we were at Maya Wheel? No, not Maya, at Tamayo's, I'm sorry, at Tamayo's in East LA. We were at Tamayo's in East LA watching the numbers come in, and, we were blown away by the fact that we undid Proposition 227, which was, Many of us thought we would, in our lifetime, many of us thought we wouldn't ever see it happen, right? But it was a cause for all of us, not for the classroom teacher, for the parents, for everybody. There wasn't one person that didn't, wasn't involved. Almost every school district in the state passed a resolution. I mean, it was amazing. And then I know, then the question was, what is that? What's the state going to do with it? And then we did get the State Department wrote a grant to the Sobrato Family Foundation, and they got money to create what was called the English Learner Roadmap. But what was so important about that is that the very first meeting of the committee that was pulled together to write that or advise on the writing of that roadmap, the very first meeting was the day after the election of Proposition 58. And so I remember Tom Torlakson say, well, we know where the roadmap is going now because of the election the day before. So that was serendipitous. The roadmap, the department got funding. The department was going to create a roadmap for English learners, which was new state policy. And we knew what it had to be based upon, a new law that upheld multilingualism and English language development. So that too was an important day. We hope that bilingual biliteracy programs become the standard program for English learners. It's the standard program, not the one that you have to struggle for, and not the one that you have to, um, you know, um, make sure you have good leadership in a district for. But it's the standard program, and the parents have to opt out of a bilingual biliteracy program, and that we ought to be looking to that. We know the research tells us it's the best program for children. It's the best program to become English proficient. We know bilingualism leads to better academic achievement. So why shouldn't it not be the standard program for all of our English learners? And so these next few years, I think that's what we have to work towards. And the UCLA Civil Rights Center has put out a paper with that to that effect. And so we think we need to use that as our guiding vision, and that's what we ought to be looking for. We know we don't have to come up with rationale or reasons or controlling everybody. Now we need to put that in place. It should be our standard program. Well, I think all the educators should become part of CAVE because that's where they get their strength. That's where they learn about leadership. That's where they find out what's the latest, what's the best research. People all ought to be engaged in local chapters and ought to be active. Um, and um, and my advice to them is just to know that what they're doing is the very best for children, and and to speak up, not to be quiet. If there are problems in a district, you need to speak up. If you have a local chapter, the chapter will speak up for you. So I think we're in a place now where all of us don't have to worry about what we say because, we have state policy in our favor. So I think we have to take it and run with it. We have to say, this is it. And we all have to be part of that movement. Happy 50th anniversary, Kave.